Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting for the Committee on Regulation to consider a recommendation on the project Federal Agency Collaboration with State, Local, Tribal, and Territorial Governments. So my name is Bakaja Caldwell, and I am serving as staff counsel for the project. I'm joined today by the consultants, Professors Jennifer Celine and Pamela Cosner-McCann, as well as the committee chair, Helen Serracio. So before I go ahead and call the roll, the ACUS Research Director, Jeremy Graveways, would like to say a few words. Jeremy?
Thanks, Bakash. I'll be real brief, but thank you all for being here today to discuss this important project. Thank you, of course, to Professors Celine and McCann. Thank you to Helen for leading the discussion today, and Bakaja for helping us get through it. Look forward to today's discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy. Okay, so I will call two rolls. The first roll will be the names of committee members and alternates of committee members. After each name is called, the person should say here so we can make sure that their mics are working. So first up, Reeve Gold. She might be joining a little later. Carolyn Seacott.
Here.
Jennifer Kelly Kennedy, designated alternate for Dan Cohen.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here.
Thank you. Nick Goldstein.
I'm here.
Alice Kottmeyer. Jay Schwartz. Helen Serracio.
I'm here.
Morning, Helen. Sydney Shapiro.
Here.
Peter Strauss.
Here.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Okay, is there any committee member present whose name I did not call? Oh, Reeve, I see you.
Good morning, Bakaja. How are you?
Good morning, how are you?
Doing all right.
Okay, so not hearing that there's another committee member present whose name I did not call, I will move on to the second roll. So the second roll will be the names of ACUS members who are not on the committee and their alternates. After each name is called, the person should say here so we can make sure that their mics are working. I will not call the names of members of the public who do not have speaking privileges, meaning you should write in the chat if you would like to speak. So turning next, Courtney Mallon.
Here.
Jim Tozy.
Here.
Steph Statham.
Here. Thank you.
And Alex Goodenough. Okay, some people might be joining us a little bit late, but I'll make a note of that. Okay, so is there any ACUS member present whose name I did not call?
Alex just joined.
Oh, perfect. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, everyone.
Awesome. Okay, so please reach out via the chat function or via email if you experience any technical difficulties during the meeting. ACUS staff will be happy to assist you with troubleshooting or moving to alternative means of participating. So with that, I will turn it over to Helen to give the ground rules for the committee meeting today.
Thank you, Bakaja. And we do have someone with a 202-731-8852 phone number. Do we know who that is?
Jay Schwartz from the Federal Reserve.
Oh, thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy to have us all here today to talk about such an important draft recommendation. So please note that only ACUS members, including government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee and their designated alternates have full speaking privileges, meaning a non-ACUS member should write in the chat if you would like to speak. To avoid background noise, I'd ask that you keep your microphone on mute and either use Zoom's hand raise feature or add a comment in the chat feature if you'd like to speak. I'll then call on you and you can unmute yourself. Please then remute yourself when you're done. I'd also ask that ACUS members and their designated alternates use the webcam. It helps us with have a productive dialogue. With respect to attendees other than ACUS members and alternates, participation requires the unanimous consent of the committee members. Time permitting, I'll consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points, and we will presume that committee members consent absent raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please so indicate in the chat feature or by using Zoom's hand raise feature and wait to speak until I call on you. You can then unmute yourself and then please remute yourself when you're done speaking. For all participants, please use the chat function only to indicate that you'd like to speak, or for committee members and their alternates to vote when asked. Please do not hold any sidebar discussions or put substantive comments in the chat feature. Only members of the Regulation Committee have a vote. Please do not vote unless you're a member of the committee. We have a list of committee members in case we are unsure. And then I will turn it over for the presentation on the research.
I think it's going to be me. So good morning, everyone. We put together just a few notes to help frame the discussion over the recommendations and sort of give you an idea of where we were coming from as we were developing the report and talking to ACUS about the recommendations. So over 80% of federal statutes enacted by Congress since the enactment of the Administrative Procedure Act contemplate collaboration between federal agencies and state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. So what does this mean? For example, the Army collaborates with state and local environmental agencies when constructing water navigation projects. The Federal Highway Administration and the Bureau of Indian Affairs work with tribal governments to facilitate tribal transportation planning on tribal lands. The FDIC is the primary federal regulator of banks that are chartered by the states that do not join the Federal Reserve System. The Election Assistance Commission works with state and local governments in the administration of election law. Even an agency that we typically think of as maybe not having that much interaction with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, something like the Department of State, even partners with state university systems to implement international student exchange programs. So these partnerships and this collaboration is everywhere. And traditionally, when we think of them, we tend to zero in on a particular type, a particular agency, or a particular program. And so in this report, we don't do that. And we take what we acknowledge can be an intellectually uncomfortable approach, and we look at all of them together: enforcement, regulation, grants, etc. And why do we do this? Well, from our perspective, federal agencies balance dozens, if not hundreds, of these partnerships and these collaborations with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments at any given moment in time. So if we're going to provide a series of best practices for federal agencies in this regard, it's helpful to think of that through a public management perspective. And we do fully recognize that this report and the series of recommendations can feel public managey and maybe not more traditional law. A note on our research process: the draft report, if you've made your way through it, is just that. It's a draft and an incomplete one at that. And we'll be continuing to work on that through November. So any suggestions that you have would be incredibly helpful. To understand the federal agencies' partnerships with these other governmental entities, we begin by looking at the statutes which authorize them. So we use large language modeling, text analysis, and hand coding to really get a good idea of what these statutes look like, how many there are, what these provisions look like, etc. But of course, statutory language is just the starting point when we think about what federal agencies do. And so to understand how they implement these statutory mandates on a day-to-day basis, we, over the course of both the Office of the Chairman project that dealt a little bit with this subject matter and the recommendation project that we're talking about now, we talked to over 60 persons from federal agencies, GAO, state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, associations that serve state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, good governance organizations and nonprofits, as well as representatives who advocate for state, local, tribal, and territorial interests. And from those interviews, there's a couple of things that we wanted to highlight, again, in the spirit of framing our discussion. for today. The most common words that both federal agencies and their partners used when discussing collaboration were people, work, want, and different. And the most common phrase across all interviews was face to face. So there's a suggestion here that we really need to be thinking about the people and the interactions on a personal level when we're thinking about collaboration between federal agencies and state, local, tribal, and territorial governments. The next most common phrases that were used were financial assistance, regional offices, and share information. Again, things to think about and keep in mind as we're discussing these recommendations. ACUS also published a request for information, and the comments that we received here on the project were really helpful in that they provided us with viewpoints outside of ACUS's traditional network, particularly from state, local, and tribal governments. And so we encourage ACUS to continue to do that sort of thing, to hear from interested persons who may not necessarily be traditionally within ACUS's network. We organized our analysis in terms of challenges that agencies face, as well as the successes that they've had in facilitating positive partnerships. And you'll see our thoughts in those regards in the recommendations. So we thought about the challenges that agencies face as they work through the stages of a relationship with a state, local, tribal, or territorial government. So from the frustrations that they bring to the table as they begin to work together, to how those frustrations inform initial programmatic decisions, to the day-to-day interactions. And then when thinking about the successes and in keeping with our other discussions, we thought about how agencies and their SLTTG partners can bridge different perspectives, acknowledge each other's cultural differences, identify common objectives, clarify their processes, establish accountability mechanisms, and utilize technology efficiently. So we look forward to observing the discussion.
Thank you for that excellent overview. Bakaja, are you going to share the text?
Yes, I'll go ahead and do it right now.
Okay, excellent. And I realize 3 hours is a long time to sit. So, and if no one objects, I'm planning maybe around 11 to have like a 10-minute break so people can stretch their legs. So we'll look for to see if there's a natural break around that time to give everybody a little bit of a reprieve before we hit the rest of it. We thought it would make sense, since preamble language changes based off of changes we make in the recommendations, that we would start with the recommendations first. So we're going to start with recommendation number 1 under facilitating collaboration generally with state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, which says federal agencies should establish organizational units, supervisory structures, and central and field operations as appropriate that reinforce collaboration with SLTTGs and facilitate appropriate communication among agency personnel involved in collaborations at all levels. Anyone have any thoughts, comments, suggested edits? Courtney.
This is related to my comment that I submitted. Just from those in the community that are like really deal with tribal collaboration on a day-to-day basis and are more sensitive to that government-to-government relationship, the general preference is to have tribal listed after state in recognition of that government-to-government relationship. My comment was slightly misleading in the territorial. I don't think that when I had said DOJ, it was the Office of Tribal Justice where that comment had come from. I don't think they had a preference as to where territorial appears in that order. I have seen it where territorial comes after tribal because they are kind of a similar, but also territorial sometimes comes at the end just because of geographic scope and because it comes in less frequently than the other ones. So my comment was mainly about tribal just because of the sensitivities related to that.
I completely appreciate that. Looking to Bakaja, the drafters, is anyone opposed to us putting tribal after state?
We actually spent a fair amount of time in developing our research on this exact topic, because across government, we did see a differential acronyms, for lack of a better word. So the most common language in terms of evaluating appropriations in particular is across the board is how you defined it. So we would be fine with that. But we would just note that many agencies do refer to the partners as either SLTTGs or just state, local, tribal, and territorial. They sort of drop the G in the acronym, and other agencies, including different aspects of the Department of Justice, refer to the partners as state, local, and tribal, often leaving off territorial altogether. So from our perspective, we're happy with whatever everyone else would want to do. We just did want to note that it's not that the use of acronyms is not as consistent across the federal government.
Appreciate that. Then it looks like we have consensus unless anyone else has any other thoughts on. Steph, is this on the same or different issue?
It's not on the draft recommendation text. I was just hoping to offer a general comment before we jump in.
Okay.
So first, thank you to the authors of the report. I thought it was really excellent, and I really enjoyed the discussion. If it's okay, I have a couple of notes that I would love to send you offline. I don't need to take the committee's time with it. I thought the draft recommendation was also very well done, and I appreciated every point of it. But at the same time, I do want to recognize that it is a difficult time for our federal agency colleagues, and that this recommendation is like 20 points and extremely directive. And these are responsibilities that agencies already have. But I do think, given the current environment, that it would be helpful to think proactively as a committee about opportunities to support agencies in their implementation of this recommendation. So, for example, to provide the type of training materials that we recommend agencies use or may recommend agencies use at the end of this process, as well as potentially a model plan or some sort of guide to help them in implementing what really are a set of very helpful but also very detailed and involved recommendations. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Sid, oops. Okay, did I just accidentally? Sorry, everyone. I'm having IT this morning. Did I miss you, Sid? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. IT's not my friend this morning, but we will get in there.
So I'm going back to recommendation 1. Let me second. This is one of the really great reports I've ever read. To reach out and try to get your hands around everything studied seemed Herculean, and it was really impressive that the research and writing that was done. Mine's a question. So in 1, you call for establishing appropriate units to reinforce collaboration. That assumes that there is collaboration going on, and that's fine if there is, but do we know that? Should it say establish or reinforce?
Good point. I saw Carolyn jump on. Did you have a response to that, or? Okay, nope. Going either then to our drafters in ACUS, or we can see what Pamela or Jen might have to say from what they did.
Yeah, that change seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Okay, and just to clarify, do you want it should establish or reinforce here or below?
I think right after that, establish or reinforce collaboration. Yeah, there.
I can't activate chat, but I'd like to speak.
Oh, thanks, Peter. On this issue or a different issue, Peter?
I think it's on the general issue that you've opened up.
Okay. Well, hold on a second. Reeve, are you on something the same or different?
It's kind of more of a general comment. It's not this specific wording.
Okay. So we'll get to Peter and Reeve and Carolyn in a second then. Does anyone have any issues with including the language establish or reinforce here? Okay. Reeve, you've been very patient, so let's go to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Helen. So yeah, I just had kind of a more general comment. I think on sort of this group of recommendations, 1, 2, and sort of all each of these up front. And it's maybe more than anything just in the nature of a question for the consultant. So I guess I'd first echo Sid and Steph in saying, I really, really enjoyed the report. I think it was very well done. And I thought actually one of the most useful aspects of it was that it really broke out in a way that I don't think we've seen in the past, sort of the differences between the considerations for state governments, for local governments, for tribal governments. And then I may be wrong, but I don't know that we've ever looked at territorial governments particularly. So I think that was actually a very unique contribution and very, very valuable. And sort of growing from that, I mean, I guess sort of the question I have with respect to these recommendations is a very broad, it's sort of promote collaboration generally amongst SLTTGs. And what I'm wondering is there any way to sort of speak more to sort of, how that may differ depending on the type of, entity with whom you're collaborating within the context of the recommendation? Or do we feel like sort of collapsing them all together is the best way to go? Because it seems to do more of the latter. I'm wondering if we're sort of missing possibly some of the nuance, or, for instance, working in a state government myself, sort of how that interaction may differ, for instance, with a tribal government or local government, if we could provide kind of more specific recommendations depending on the specific type of collaboration that's occurring. So I'm wondering if maybe the consultants could speak to that based on their research.
Yes, that's a good point. Thank you. Jennifer or Pam?
Peter?
Pam, do you want to take this one?
Sure. It's definitely something we've thought about along the way as we've done our research, because when we've spoken with folks from federal agencies, part of what they do, many of them, actually not all, but many folks, they are aware of the differences between the partners that they're working with, or the units that they're engaging with at the state, local, tribal, or territorial level. And the differences sometimes are really stark, and other times they're very similar. And it depends. And so what we ended up doing here is we left it them as this group, because we're trying to get this like broad perspective. And the fact that if you look at the statutory language, sometimes territories are defined as states in the statutory language, at the definitional part of that at the beginning. Other times, they're not. And so sometimes they get grouped with localities. It's really interesting how across different titles, sections, subsections, et cetera, we see differences. And so it's very difficult to say, here's what we do with territories when or here's what we do when it comes to local units of government, when in fact it depends on what the language says in the statute sometimes. And so we left it broad to hopefully, kind of start this conversation. But I think, we can continue to think through ways to make that more specific if in fact that would be helpful.
Thank you. Anything else for me? All right. Peter, yep. After Caroline, we'll do Peter, you're next. Thank you. Caroline, thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'll join everyone in saying that I really enjoyed the report. I have a suggestion for the report. I'll send that offline. I wanted to make a general comment kind of about, I guess, 1 and 2, and I noticed it's sort of the opposite of Reeve's comment. So you guys can consider which. So I saw the part of the value of this report is that you looked kind of across the board and looked at things that are common across the board to come up with common things that are frustrating across the board that then can come out as recommendations for all agencies to do. that then have to be informed by their own specific what statutes they're looking at and what actual entities they're dealing with. So I actually, I didn't, it's not that I didn't like recommendation 1 and 2, but those two stood out to me as the most sort of, I don't know what our recommendation is. Our recommendation is do something. And the other ones were so much more specific that across the board, it'd be good if you did this more often and found someone that was within to do this. Start early, look for the funding opportunities that could then help down the line. And these two, 1 and 2, establish organizational units, supervisory structures, just felt like something's missing. We don't know what, but you have to figure it out. And so I like these first two the least of the other recommendations. I felt they were different.
Thank you, Caroline. Was there anything in there that you could think of changing that would like help resolve that for you, or are you more proposing that you don't even want them? Or I'll turn over.
I was going to put out there that if we think they're sufficiently different and we can do this at the end, I was thinking to remove those two. That was just my 2 cents. But again, I'm not, I'm open to hearing other views.
Okay, I'll turn to our consultants to see if they have any thoughts, or if we can also kind of pin this one to come back to think about too after we've looked at the other ones. Pam or Jennifer?
Yeah, so one thing, if we're looking across the board, particularly in our interviews, in the agencies that seem to have the most energy in terms of collaboration, and you can feel it like when you're talking to administrators. It's quite actually, that was probably the most surprising thing to me as we are going through this process of now like 10 months worth of interviews, is that you can feel it when they prioritize this sort of thing. And the thing that set them out, like aside from the other agencies, was that they had really thought about how every part of the agency was involved in the process. And in addition, had structures in place for that were contingent upon like the office and the agency as opposed to the person, because a lot of times what we found is that there might be a person who is exceptionally good at this, but then the moment that person leaves, everything falls apart. And so I think that the spirit of 1 and 2 was to try to capture that energy that we observed. But we are happy to to sort of think through how we could do that better. I think that that's something that would take some time on our end to really discuss with ACUS and try to figure out.
Thanks, Jennifer. All right, any other thoughts? Okay, Peter, you've been very patient. Thank you so much.
Not at all. I want to start by agreeing with Sid that this really is a remarkable report, and a lot of it's striking and wonderful to me how much energy went behind organizing to do it, with the seminar and all of that. But I'm struck that the report has got so many blanks in it, that it is premature. And I don't know that ACUS has previously developed recommendations on the basis of reports that are not yet really ready for complete consideration. So that's one issue I wanted to raise. Another issue, which is maybe related to it, is that I was kind of missing a definition of collaboration, or to put it another way, I think there's an implicit definition of collaboration, which is that it's not about formal decisional responsibilities. I'm wearing my former hat as general counsel with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And I tried to relate these recommendations to the Commission's function in delegating the authority to regulate nuclear medicine to the states and overseeing their exercise of that general function. About policy making and about rulemaking and other forms of policy making, this project makes enormous sense. but about those issues which could be thought of as collaboration, like that licensing over delegation and oversight, or like EPA's state implementation plan approvals. I'm less sure that this is well fit to the circumstances.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I'll turn to ACUS about the report not being finished doing a recommendation, and then if Jennifer and if Pam want to talk about some of your other points too.
I'll defer to Jeremy on the report one. My understanding is that this report is sufficiently fleshed out enough to consider a draft recommendation. It's an iterative process, but Jeremy, I'll sort of turn to you to see if there's anything you want to add.
Not much to add. I mean, I think the research there's been months and months and months of research that's gone into it. The research phase is basically done.
The research is done, but the report is not.
I think most of the
here and everywhere.
Yes, certainly the committee can reach its own conclusions on that. We have the consultants here who have thought through what should be in the report and can certainly answer questions. I think mostly it's background material that needs to go in. Most of the actual evidence that goes to this specific recommendation is complete.
Yeah, so on that point, we made the conscious decision, and we actually discussed this with ACUS. We did not feel comfortable putting any word on the page that we could not defend specifically with citations, case language, literature from political science, public administration, law, economics. And so every word on the page that is on the page right now is to that point. We could have thrown in language that then would have been changed over the course of the next 3 months, but we felt that it was better to make sure that absolutely everything was ready to go by December than to throw some stuff on the page that ultimately would not that didn't have the amount of support, like footnote support, etc. So that's where we are. We have done all the research. We know, like, we have everything outlined. Pam can talk to specifics about the statutory analysis, which we also run. I mean, this way, that way, in every way. So we feel very confident in moving forward with this, and that's not a self-serving thing. I've been on ACUS reports before, and I can honestly say that this one is better researched than my other two. And even though the other two were longer and had case studies and seemed to be more complete at this moment in time. So, and then with the respect to the collaboration, on page 10 of the report, we do define collaboration. You're correct that we refer to it as any formal or informal joint activity by federal agencies and state, local, tribal, and territorial governments that are intended to provide more public value than could be produced when the partners act alone. In addition, that definition itself, we spent a ton of time on, especially in the developmental stages of the project, thinking through how we wanted to define collaboration, how broad we wanted to be, how narrow we wanted to be. And in order to capture the things that agencies do across the board in all different sorts of agencies, we purposefully made the decision to include both formal and informal. And I don't, Pam, if you'd want to talk a little bit about the work that we've done with the statutes.
Of course. Thank you so much. I think this is, it's a question we began with, actually, like really trying to struggle through what does it mean? What does collaboration mean? And so that's why we tried very, in working with ACUS, like to think through what that really meant and to make it as broad as we could so that we were capturing, as you mentioned, all of these different relationships that we see. And previous research has shown as well, in terms of sometimes federal agencies are supervising states, other times states are asking for technical assistance. There's sometimes delegation, all of those sorts of things. And so when we're looking through particularly the statutory language, we include all of those different roles, I guess, in terms of the textual analysis, as well as trying to really understand, like, what does this look like in different programs across different agencies and over time. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Peter, any other thoughts?
No, again, I'm just completely unsure that this report deals with matters that are as focused as licensing, the use of medical radiation, which is an area where the NRC has a distinct responsibility for dealing with the states. But recommendations 1 and 2, which we were talking about before, seem sort of strange in relationship to that activity, which is formally established. And I would think the same thing is true for the EPA's SIPs. I really understand this and appreciate it as a address to those issues where consultation is called for, but not so much where decision is called for.
Thank you. Anyone other thoughts on the point? It is challenging to write something broadly for every different type of iteration of relationship all the agencies have with states, tribes, and localities and territories. So if we can acknowledge maybe in provisions in here where appropriate, that's kind of what we're trying to do, maybe? That, yeah, like we're trying to find something that generally works, but noting that sometimes depending on statutory relationships, it's not always going to work. Sid, I see your hand came up.
Can we handle this maybe in the preamble, which is yet to be written?
Oh, the preamble is written. Yeah, we just think about it. That could be a good place
right,
to
but
go back to
Peter,
it. Yeah.
Peter's point is a good one, and although the thrust of the report is generalization, I can see the usefulness of bracketing certain kinds of things, or at least saying this may not apply or as appropriate, and just making that general point.
Yeah. That is a helpful recommendation. We can put a pin in it for that, so when we get to the preamble, we can think about places where we could be including that language. So thank you for the helpful suggestion. All right. So back to, did you have another thing to Sid, or was your hand like, okay, legacy, great. So back to our, the first recommendation. Any other thoughts on it before we move to the second one? I see that Steph put a comment because she had to step away for a minute for the second recommendation. So did you have a comment? Oh, no. Oh, you're on mute.
Before we go back to the specific language in 1 or 2, I think we left on the table Reeves' point about differentiation. So again, the report is about generalization, but does it support maybe somewhere along the line a recommendation that agencies should also think about not only what's common, but what isn't common? Reeve, I think that's what you were getting at, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Sid, and I would definitely agree with if I'll give some thought to some potential language, be adding something to that effect to sort of capture that nuances to sort of the range of potential interactions, and like Sid said, what is common and what's not.
Thanks for the helpful suggestion. If you want to think about it along the way, we can think about what might be appropriate in this one as we come through them, or if someone has specific language, even we can do that now too. But it's a good suggestion. Thank you. Then if no other comments on the first recommendation, for number 2, Steph had a comment saying if some agencies have general guidelines already, we might want to change the language to say develop or maintain general guidelines. I see Pam shaking her head in agreement.
Progress.
Reeve?
Actually, as I give some thought to it, maybe this one is where we could possibly capture the point, and as part of these general guidelines, maybe just sort of lay out, the range of possible interactions and, sort of determine what's appropriate with respect to states, local governments, tribal governments, that it captures that nuance, that variation. So maybe as part of these general guidelines, write out the procedures with respect to the type of entity with which the federal government is interacting.
That's a good idea. So, and I think it gets to the prior comment about like, why do we have number 1 and 2? So this might be a good place to flesh out the something to effect that in the guidelines, federal agencies should. What was the good language you had, Reed?
Federal agencies should provide. I mean, I'll have to be wordsmith, but essentially, provide information or additional guidance on how to approach interactions, depending on whether it's a state government, a local government, a tribal government, or territory. Both have sort of general, overarching, collaborative approaches, but then also sort of bucketed depending on the type of entity with which the federal government is collaborating.
Does something like that get to what you're thinking of? Because we can also committee on style and wordsmith it, but does that capture the idea?
I think everything except maybe the last EG. I think it's more nuanced, because I think 3 gets to sort of that piece. I think it's kind of more whether it's a state government, a local government, tribal government, or territorial government, as opposed to the type of collaboration that's occurring.
Thank you, Reeve. Thank you for giving us something to work with. Anyone else have any other thoughts on adding this new language? I don't see any other hands. Great. Thank you.
I like what Pam
Oh.
put in the chat as well.
Oh, highlighting the unique differences and commonalities. Thank you.
I'm still having trouble.
All right. Thank you for that. I guess the Committee on Style can work on that one too. When we meet again, we can always nuance the language a little bit more. Any other comments or thoughts on the second recommendation? I'm not seeing any hands. We can go to the third recommendation then, which is federal agencies should collaborate with SLTTGs, even if not required to do so by law, When doing so would help agencies meet specific needs and foster innovation, allow agencies to allocate scarce resources more efficiently, leverage external capabilities, promote greater participation in federal administration, or otherwise help agencies administer federal programs more effectively. Who has any comments, suggestions? That is Peter. Is that your hand?
You're on mute.
Peter, it looks like you are on mute.
There we go, unmute. This really goes to what I had said earlier. I like this part of it, this particular recommendation a lot, because it speaks to collaboration as a more general process. And at the very least, I think the recommendations ought to open with the definition of what is meant by collaboration. And it needs to be more specific than what's on page 10. That is, from my perspective at least, thinking about what my agency's responsibilities once were, it needs to tell me whether I'm being advised how to deal with states, local governments, and the like when issues of general policy, rulemaking, and the like are coming up, or whether it's addressed to a specific function, which perhaps involves specific identified folk and not the generality of states, tribal governments, localities, and the like.
Thank you, Peter. To the point of where we should have a definition on collaboration, would it make more sense to have that in the preamble than in the recommendations themselves?
If the preamble, I mean, I've always been told that the preamble is just the preamble and that it doesn't affect the recommendations. The recommendations are the recommendations. And so something on the order of, in speaking of collaboration, we are addressing circumstances in which agencies are expected to consult with states, tribal governments, local governments, etc., territorial governments on general issues.
All right, thank you, Peter. I'm going to turn to both of our consultants to see if your general definition is the same understanding of which they were working under. Caroline? Caroline, were you on the same issue or?
But I let the consultants, Jennifer and Pam, please go ahead.
This I think we could probably, if this is along the lines of where we want to go, we could probably borrow some of the language from the paragraph from the first paragraph of the preamble, which does get to the different types of collaboration. One thing that I think both Pam and I feel very strongly about is to not use the word consultation. Consultation is a very specific process that is triggered usually either in the tribal context or in the state context with respect to say the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act and that sort of thing. And because we are thinking about things more broadly, we really would urge the committee not to use the word consultation.
In addition to that, I think it's important to realize that I think Jen said that it's at the beginning where we're really looking from the perspective of federal agencies trying to weigh and manage all of these different types of relationships at the same time, oftentimes. And so sometimes they are working with states with respect to licensing, and that can be occupations, it can be laboratories, it can be lots of different things that are happening. There's also enforcement responsibilities that are shared in different ways. And that came through with our in our interviews quite a bit, actually, that they have these things going on at the same time as sometimes grants and aid or technical assistance and other sorts of things going on. And so that's just a clarifying point or maybe a hopefully point to add to that.
Thank you. And then Caroline, did you have something you wanted to add?
I was just going to say, similarly, the report struck me as it wants to include way beyond just informal consultations. I was just going to make the point that enforcement was one of them. And if we have a definition in the recommendations that's narrower than that, then that kind of flows throughout, not just number 3, but notice that all the titles for all the recommendations use the word collaboration. So if we have a narrow definition of collaboration, it'll actually narrow all the recommendations, not just number 3, for example, or something specific. So I would urge us to be careful, and in the ones that we think should be narrowly tailored to informal, say, consultations, then we just use that in those recommendations.
Thank you.
And
oh, go
sorry.
ahead. Go right ahead.
It is also worth noting. I think Jeremy flagged this for the committee discussion in the next paragraph, but ACUS did just do a series of recommendations on both state and tribal consultation specifically. So this is definitely much broader than that, to Caroline's point.
Thank you. So it sounds like we can think about a definition of collaboration and where we could put that. And it sounds like that's something we'll have ready for our next meeting. So, okay. Sid?
In the recommendation, it says leverage external capabilities. I find that to be vague. I don't know exactly what that means.
All right. I'm looking to either Jennifer, Pam, or Bakaja, what you were thinking?
I'm happy to jump in and just say what I think we were thinking, which is just that you're able to leverage the capabilities of partners. So they're external to you, but Jen and Pam, that's sort of what we were thinking. So I think that's in alignment with what you wrote in your report.
Although admittedly, that is like public administration jargony. So there could be a better way to say that.
Well, even defining it as partners, and then they're partners and they're partners. Every partner. Can that be more specific?
Does that new language resolve your question, Sid?
Although we are trying to avoid the word. This is speaking of words. It was noted that partner can have a very specific legal connotation, and so while in the report we purposefully used the word partner to capture what we hoped was like a more collaborative, working together relationship. In the recommendation, I think ACUS was trying very carefully to not trigger that sort of language, and look, Jeremy can speak to that more.
How about groups or institutions or something?
Or since we're talking about it would be the external capabilities of the SLTTGs, why don't we just reference them? Leverage external capabilities.
That would work.
And Jeremy, I see your hand.
Yeah, I don't want to speak to partner right now. I'm sure we'll get into that. But I mean, what you're trying to say here, right, is benefit from the experience, expertise, and resources of another entity, right? I mean, would it be plainer, less sort of public managey speak to say something like that? It allows the agencies to benefit from the expertise and resources of other entities with similar missions or something like that. Mostly to get rid of the phrase leverage external capabilities, because I'm guessing that will come up again when we get to the plenary session.
A little too wonky?
Well, maybe a little too wonky. I think what we're saying, though, I mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, is just benefit from the expertise and resources of other entities.
All right, I'm looking to Sid and have to capture what you were thinking. I see a thumbs up. Anyone else have any other thoughts on the language? Thank you, Jeremy, for helping us find a solution. All right, anyone else have any other comments, concerns with the third recommendation? Oh, Pam is saying, do we need the similar missions? And please raise your hand, Pam, so that way we're trying to keep you out of the chat. But thank you. We can take out similar missions. I think that looks fine. Anyone else, any other thoughts on the language before we move on? Peter looks happy.
No, not so happy.
Oh, you clapped your hands.
I don't,
No
on
worries.
my computer, I'm having a hard time finding a way of signaling I want to talk. You know, this recommendation and all the rest of the recommendations in the first set, at least, really are addressed to the general situation. If I think of, again, the oversight of nuclear medicine licensing, it's not relevant to either 3 or particularly 4 federal agencies who designate an official who will be primarily responsible for coordinating and evaluating collaborations. I mean, this is and appropriate. I don't mind it. I think from that perspective, this is really a terrific set of recommendations. But it doesn't seem to me well suited to those situations where there is a particular office with particular responsibilities for dealing with a particular state or local or tribal government. And I've said that too often, so I'll stop.
No, we appreciate that. I think we need to figure out how to address within the language here an acknowledgement that depending on the statutory regime that the agency is working on, these may work for some, not all others. Carolyn?
I guess I have a question for Peter, as I want to understand why wouldn't designating an official who'd be responsible for at least evaluating how the relationship is working, which some of the other recommendations speak to, why wouldn't that be useful for even a very formal relationship, in the sense that, you know, if Jennifer and Pam's work is revealing that a lot of folks on both sides are unhappy with how some of these relationships are going. I mean, maybe it's something to look into. Does it split? Are the formal ones working really well, and that maybe some of this doesn't need to be recommended to them, or you know? But if it's mostly discontent, and these are ways to potentially make things better, and having someone evaluate and provide some guidance if the relationship isn't working well.
Well, the relationship with Idaho over nuclear medicine will be different from the relationship with Maine over nuclear medicine. There are specific individuals who are responsible for that oversight function generally, and they already are primarily responsible for coordinating and evaluating those processes. 4 strikes me as saying, no, there ought to be a particular person in the agency who's generally responsible for these issues. And so this is introducing a bit of bureaucratic overkill, if you like. I just don't, again, when we're talking about general policy making, rulemaking, other matters on which the agency is dealing with the public in a general way, super. Absolutely no problem with it. But when there are specific functions, like, I mean, I keep coming back to it because that's where part of my responsibility was, assuring that Idaho is doing a good job in licensing, in dealing with the uses of nuclear medicine. I don't see this recommendation as well fit to it. And I just think that its subject ought to be defined in ways that don't make it seem as if it's intended to apply to that kind of function.
Thank you, Peter. Jen, I see your hand went up.
Yeah, so on a similar vein in terms of like what is going to be right, and the relationship that you're building with, say, Idaho is going to be very different than the relationships that you're working with Maine. This is a common theme across all agencies and all different types of agency actions. And so another example would be the Food and Drug Administration. They were wonderful when we were meeting with them. We had 6 different people from 6 different offices, and one thing that really came out in that particular meeting was that, say, for drug drug approval and things like that, there within the Food and Drug Administration, there are people who are on the ground, there are people who are supervising those on the ground, and then there are also people who are facilitating communication between those who are on the ground and then the politicals, their words, not mine, in DC. And what they found over a long period of time was that having this such an oversight structure really ensured consistency in actions across the country in terms of implementing policy, but allowed for recognition of the different relationships that go on the ground, partner to partner, resource to resource, enforcement action to permitting to licensing, et cetera. And so we found that the agencies where people tended to be less frustrated also had a similar type of structure to ensure consistency in terms of implementation on the ground, as well as communication across all levels of the organization. And so I think that's the vein in which we were trying to get at 4. However, I think perhaps maybe 4 needs to be a little bit longer to help clarify that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else have any? I know we were on 3, but now we've kind of creeped to 4. So and then I know Jeremy had a question on number 4. So should this official be the federalism and tribal consultation official identified in recommendation 25-2? I've seen Carolyn shake your head no.
Well, I just thought that we've spent so much time thinking with Peter about how these are so different, and to make it in the recommendation, to lose that discretion about who the individual is, I think would just exacerbate that.
Thank you. Anyone have other thoughts on this? I guess to Peter and Jen's points, like thoughts about how we could make some edits to this language. I saw Pam's hand go up.
Sure, I'll try it this way this time. Thank you. One of the things that we might be able to do is elaborate a little bit more on that there's lots of different types of relationships across governing levels, and that just being with an awareness of the differences across programs and types of relationships and types of subnational entities, to sort of tie it back to those earlier comments we were getting.
Okay, let's play with this.
And governmental entities, not subnational.
Thank you. Peter, is this starting to get towards what you were thinking?
I'm not sure. I mean, basically, this is a recommendation addressed to agencies in their general functions. And so it's unclear to me how well it deals with specific functions. And I've said that too often, so I'll stop saying it. But again, in the nuclear medicine context, it makes no sense for the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to have somebody outside the office that is responsible for overseeing the regulation of nuclear medicine by the states who is responsible for coordinating and evaluating what that body is doing, unless we're talking about the commissioners themselves, which of course they have that function. It's creating an overstructure that I don't see a warrant for.
Did I saw your hand come up?
What if we said should designate an official in an appropriate office, recognizing that an agency might have 2 or 3 or 5 of these officials, as Peter was just talking about?
Okay. Thank you. Steph?
Yeah, I think I was going to make a similar point, which is that if the individual in that office who is responsible for coordinating with states or other regulated entities is the appropriate individual, I don't think the regulation as written would preclude it. I am worried in an appropriate office might be read as singular, and it says unofficial. So maybe we should just say unofficial and then add a parens S, or say an appropriate office, add a parens S, just some way to indicate that we're open to multiple officials, if that's what's appropriate.
Yeah, that's what I was intending.
Yeah, I think
at FDA, you could have, since there are 4 divisions, you could have 4 of these officials.
Yeah, I think we're in complete agreement. And if the Committee on Style wants to improve that, I think that's totally fine.
Thank you. Great. Anyone else have any other thoughts or comments for the 4th recommendation? If not, we can move to number 5.
Maybe one thought I'll put out there. Maybe it's more just an idea of flipping it. For groups of collaborations with SLTJs, however the agency defines relevant groupings, there should be someone who's responsible for evaluation, in the sense that maybe it's not about how many people or where they are, but more that there's someone for whom it makes sense for the different types, because the types might be different. I'll just throw that as a thought when later, I guess, when we're thinking about this language, if that makes sense.
To the Haja or the team.
So I think I understood it, and Jen and Pam, feel free to correct me, is that it should be one person, but now that I'm hearing sort of Carolyn explain it, it might make sense to do that inverse and have it be dependent on programs and such. But Jen and Pam, I'll obviously defer to you.
I think we'll defer to the committee on this one.
Carolyn, your hand's up.
Because this is incorporating a lot of the discussion, both on types and everything, perhaps we can see versions of either and then consider later. So folks have some time to think about this.
Yeah, it looks like Makash is right, and they're going to rework the language. So in our next time we meet, we can think about it then. Great, thank you. We'll move to number 5 then. Federal agencies should seek to identify and reduce administrative burdens that SLTTGs face when collaborating with federal agencies. For example, by providing funding opportunities, simplifying applications and reporting processes, enhancing the availability of technical assistance, or reducing regulatory burdens. Give everyone a minute to read that, and then if you have any suggestions, raise your hand or comments. Steph?
I love this recommendation. I was a big proponent of reducing administrative burden at OMB and recognize that the conference has a related recommendation. And I don't disagree with this in theory, but I do think it could use a qualifier of some sort just to recognize limitations on agencies' ability to do this, like statutes that require them to have reports on certain issues. So I don't think discretionary is the right word. I might use something like and reduce administrative burdens, as appropriate, or just some sort of qualifying language to recognize that as much as agencies would love to reduce administrative burdens, sometimes they're not the ones imposing it.
That's a very fair statement. Thank you, Steph. Anyone else have any other thoughts on recommendation 5? I don't see any hands. I guess we can go to number 6, Bakaja. In collaboration with SLTTGs, federal agency personnel involved in intergovernmental affairs, regional offices, and other agency personnel should meet regularly to coordinate relationships with SLTTGs.
I think this is a great idea, and my only comment is that it's a little ambiguous as to who they're meeting with. Are they meeting with the SLTTGs or are they meeting with themselves? And I think probably it's the former, but we should just clarify by being explicit.
Thank you. I'm turning to Bakaja and Jen to see, were we like thinking internally? Or Pam?
I think this one was supposed to be with the SLTTGs. I think there's a specific one we have saying they should meet with each other. Yeah.
So it is something where in the interviews, one of the things that did come out is that occasionally agencies meeting with each other to figure out how to then communicate with, collaborate with, engage with their subnational partners. I know we're not using that word, apologies, did come out. But I think this, if I'm remembering correctly, I do believe this particular recommendation was about federal agencies meeting with or having opportunities with the SLTTGs.
All right. So then we need to think of an editorial fix to make that clear.
How about this?
Peter, is this on the same issue?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Just start with federal agencies. Start with federal agency personnel. Should meet regularly with SLTTGs in order to coordinate their relationships. I mean, if that's what the focus is. The double reference to SLTTGs is, I think, what raises the ambiguity.
So because I think we're moving that with SLTTGs at the end to after regularly.
Yes.
Then you don't need the introductory clause.
That's a nice fix. Thank you, Peter. Anyone else have any other thoughts on the new language? No, it looks like a good fix to clarifying it, so thank you. We can move to number 7 then. When federal agencies draft annual strategic and performance plans pursuant to the Government Performance Review Act, they should describe how they collaborate with SLTTGs to achieve performance goals. Anyone have thoughts, comments, edits on this one? We all like performance metrics, yay. With the silence, we could go to number 8 then, I guess. Which is federal agencies should review and update as necessary their human capital operating plans to ensure their hiring and position management needs are aligned properly with their operational goals for collaboration with SLTTGs. Any thoughts, comments? Seems very uncontroversial. I guess we can move to our next bullet. For 9, early in the implementation of federal programs, federal agencies should determine whether, when, and how to collaborate with relevant SLTTGs. In reaching their determination, agencies should engage with agency personnel involved in intergovernmental affairs, regional offices, and other relevant agency personnel, SLTTGs, national representative organizations, and members of the public. Anyone have any edits, comments? Reeve.
I guess I'm on mute. Could someone speak to what we mean by national representative organizations?
Absolutely. I'm looking to the team.
Yeah, so it refers to things like, for example, National Association of County Organizations, like the Big Seven, National Congress of American Indians, so representative organizations such as that.
So you mean specifically nationwide organizations that represent SLTTGs, rather than like U.S. Chamber of Commerce or something that's not SLTTG specific?
I think we were thinking more so no, to your point, not like the Chamber of Commerce, more so like focused on like it is their sort of mission to represent the interests and advocate for those groups. So we were thinking more so those types of entities. But I will turn it over to Jen because I see her hands up.
Yeah, I'll just speak to a little bit about the background of this, not necessarily what's on the page, but one thing that also really came out across agencies, across different programs was, and in particular, speaking to people on the other side, like the SLTTG side, is that Pam and I called them preference aggregating organizations, or so organizations that are designed to facilitate and maybe help translate the needs and concerns of SLTTGs who may not have regular interaction with federal agencies, but those national organizations that are representative of those groups would then have a better opportunity to communicate like across the board. These are things that have been going on. These are issues and concerns. Also, we found that these preference aggregating organizations do a very good job of providing technical assistance and that sort of thing. So that's the background in what we meant. Although, you know, how we refer to them honestly seems to change depending on who we talk to. So we're completely open to fixing the language.
Would you be open to maybe something like national organizations that represent SLTTGs or something like that? It seems like that would capture it more precisely.
That looks helpful. Thank you, Reeve. I think Steph, is your hand in the same kind of vein of a question, or?
It's on 9A.
Okay. Anyone else have anyone on 9C? Peter. Okay.
Yes. Suppose 9 started with something like, when implementing new federal programs with implications for SSLTGs. Because otherwise, it looks like a general recommendation, but it really is only a recommendation, as I understand it, for something new. For, okay, we're beginning to do this, and in beginning to do this, this is how we ought to behave.
I don't think the intent was for new programs, just because it could be an existing program, but a new relationship.
I agree with Jen on that because we did hear that transitions at either level, which are happening often, that that can get in the mix and make maybe an implementation that's been going on for a long time very they need to reestablish these relationships in some ways.
Well, then you don't mean early in the implementation of federal programs. What you mean rather is when there may be significant change in federal programs.
Is that capturing what you all were thinking?
I think it's both. You know, this is an either or situation, so
Yeah.
either early or when.
Yeah.
So we could probably leave that to the committee on style, but
Yeah.
Would it help to say as necessary rather than early in the implementation? As necessary, and then you could continue in the implementation of programs.
Yep.
Yeah. That's an elegant solution, Sid. All right, Steph, you have been very patient.
no problem. On 84A, I was just going to recommend changing the first agency to government to broaden the aperture a little bit, per Professor McCann's point, to allow for intergovernmental, like interagency consultations or consultations with folks over at the White House.
Good catch. I like it. Thank you. Any other suggested edits or comments or concerns?
I think it might be helpful in the preamble to, just because we've taken away early in the implementation, but just to offer some contours around when it might be a good idea to do this type of collaboration. So it would be early in the implementation of the program, or when there's a transition or a major restructuring of the program, significant changes.
On a change in national administration.
Yeah.
Okay, great. We'll leave that to Style to come up with some language that we can look at in our next meeting. So thank you, that's helpful. I see it's about 4 minutes till 11. Would you all like a break now, or would you? Oh yeah, 10 looks a little long. How about we take a 10-minute break so everyone can stretch their legs and refill their coffee or tea or water, and we come back at 11:06 to resume. Does that sound good with everyone? All right, great. Thank you. You're all doing really great. Thank you. All right. We stopped at recommendation number 10, so we'll pick up there. And we can probably break it up because it's a long one. So when collaborating with an SLTTG, federal agency should discuss the following topics with the SLTTG as appropriate, formalize agreements, and as appropriate, formalize agreements in writing. A is the nature and type of the collaborations, e.g. provision of financial assistance, consultation, and technical support. B is the legal and policy frameworks that govern the actions of federal officials and the SLTTG. C is objectives for the collaboration and metrics for determining whether the collaboration is successful. D, the leadership and points of contact for the federal agency and the SLTTG. E, procedures for managing the collaboration and communicating, including mechanisms for obtaining feedback and evaluating the collaboration. F, the information the federal agency and the SLTTG may and will share with each other and the public, and the processes by which such information will be shared. And G, the human, financial, technological, and other resources available to the federal agency and the SLTTG. It's a long one. Let's start with the first sentence, and then we can go to the A, B, C, D, E. Does anyone have any suggested edits or comments? If not, on sub-bullet A. Oh, Steph?
Sorry, this is just a general comment. I loved this section of the report that suggested having some sort of more formal memorialized process or memorandum of understanding for frameworks, but I also am just, if I were the individual responsible for this, I would feel somewhat overwhelmed if I had to do that for 50 different states, individual Indian tribes and territories. And so I guess I think that as appropriate is great, but I do see some tension between the use of the singular on SLTTG and the SLTTG and the goal of getting formalized agreements in writing. So I just wonder if the professors could speak to whether really they think these individualized agreements are appropriate, or if there's some sort of middle ground. And under what circumstances do you really want it formalized in writing? Is it really every situation, and in which case it needs to cover all of these factors? I'm just wondering in the real world what the workload looks like for somebody trying to administer this provision.
Oh, thank you for that. Jen and Pamela, we'll turn it over to you.
It's an excellent question. We did run into agencies talking about, especially if they are working with local governments, just this number of them makes any one, like if you have to actually do one at a time, that seems like a insurmountable difficulty challenge. And so it's also where these national preference aggregating units were incredibly helpful for some agencies. And so I'm not sure how we can pull that language into here, but I would love to hear what the committee thinks on that. And you're right, Steph, those are excellent comments that it's overwhelming, and when do you need, like, when is it appropriate to have formal versus informal, and so we tried to capture that with this, but I think editing as appropriate with the committee is welcomed. How's that?
Thank you.
I'm not always trying to punt everything to the preamble, but I do think this could be a good area for preamble discussion where we recognize the trade-off in terms of workload, the multiplicity of state and local governments, and tribal and territorial on top of that, and suggest factors that balance or working with a representative organization, and when a more formalized agreement is more appropriate. And that, I don't know, that could include like when it's requested by the SLTTG, but then maybe everyone would request them. So, but I do think we could address it in the preamble and try and put some parameters around when it's appropriate and what the countervailing considerations are.
It's helpful. Does this kind of come a little bit down to stuff like the formal versus the informal relationship? Like maybe when an agency isn't, engaging in a formal relationship with one of the SLTTGs, they might be thinking about having something in writing more than if it's an informal one.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. But there's a little bit of a mismatch if we're thinking about the representative organizations and an SLTTG. We would need to broaden that to include their representative organization. So
yeah. Okay, no, thank you. Sid, I saw your hand go up.
I would assume some of the problem here, which was mentioned earlier, is someone in the agency retires or leaves or goes on to a different job, and then there is no record of who do I call if this comes up. So are we talking about formalized agreements that sort of lays out full procedures, or are we just talking about memorializing and keeping track of and writing what's going on so it can be passed on to somebody else who assumes that responsibility?
That's a good question. I'm going to look to the team to see what we're looking to cover here.
Yeah, so I think we were thinking in of these in different ways, in that I was looking through, I feel like there is a recommendation coming up that talks about more like what you're talking about is like more like standard operating procedures for the agency that will continue through transitions and things like that. I think with respect to number 10, what we were thinking about was more establishing upfront like the objectives of the partnership, for example, so that there's some sort of document that both sides, in if there's disagreement or whatnot, can go to and say, okay, these are the objectives, these are the things that we have agreed upon, in terms of like even things like sharing of information, and recognizing data sensitivities, and all of those more, all of the things that could potentially come up to derail the working relationship, if there's something to in writing to point to so that both sides can sort of be like, okay, we remember this is the goal, this is where we're going. That was, I think, kind of what we were thinking.
So I don't know if this does all the work, but in 10, would it be helpful to reference 9? Because 9 says establishes collaborative relationships as necessary if they're not ongoing anyway. And in doing so, these are things that you should consider as part of the collaboration. That does bracket it somewhat.
I like that. So, Sid, what you're suggesting is saying something like when establishing collaborations with an SLTTG.
Right. So we pointed out that there's all these ongoing relationships. Some of them probably work fine, some don't. And that's what 9 goes to. And then if you're starting over or there's a hole, then 10 is defining the things that you might consider in 9.
All right. Thoughts on the new language? Pam?
So I think these changes are helpful in many ways. The one thing I might worry about is, does this cover transitions? So when there is a transition at either level and there may be a need to reimagine objectives, or would that be covered here too, do we think?
I see Jeremy's hand went up. Jeremy, what are you thinking?
So I know the committee had asked the Committee on Style to offer in the preamble sort of, well, I guess what it says here, contours of when good to do collaboration early in program, significant changes, change in national administration. I assume you're talking about all those things again. This section is obviously called initiating. Maybe we can broaden the heading to be sort of initiating and, I don't know. I don't want to call it navigating major changes, but that's sort of what you're getting at, right? We can think about some term that would be good there that would cover those, and maybe whatever language we settle on in the preamble, just echo that language again here.
It's a good solution. All right, thank you. Getting back to the text language in 10A. The nature and type of the collaboration. Not seeing any hands. 10B. Not. 10C. We like our objectives and metrics. D. E, procedures for managing the collaboration and communicating. I don't see any hands, so F. Caroline?
Just a quick comment that came up when you were reading it out loud. Maybe a comma after "and the public." This on F. Yeah, right there.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. And then G is the human, financial, technological, and other resources available. Any other comments or suggested edits for recommendation 10? If not, we can move to 11. This is all under strengthening specific collaborations with SLTTGs. 11 starts off with federal agencies should develop guidelines to assist personnel involved in specific collaborations in coordinating and managing them. Such guidelines should A, identify the official responsible for making significant decisions regarding the collaboration, B, establish mechanisms to ensure relevant personnel communicate regularly. C, establish mechanisms to ensure relevant personnel coordinate their communications with SLTTGs. D, specify processes for documenting engagements with SLTTGs. And E, establish mechanisms for obtaining SLTTG feedback and acting on it as appropriate. Steph.
I'm sorry to have left a comment in the chat and disappeared earlier, but I had a conflicting meeting.
No
I have
worries.
a similar question here about whether agencies have done this. Like, is there a model that we can point to? And if not, to suggest to our ACAS colleagues that this might be a good place to develop some implementation resources to support agencies in doing this.
All right. Pam and Jen.
Answer, yes, there are agencies that have done this very well. And there are other agencies that would definitely benefit from having some sort of guideline as they began to think about these things.
So I think it would be helpful in the preamble to just offer like a model or two.
Yeah.
And drop in a footnote to their plans if they're public, or at least who you can talk to.
Great point. Thank you for that. Anyone, any other general comments before we go to 11A? If not, we can go to 11A, identify official responsible for making specific decisions. B, the mechanisms to ensure relevant personnel communicate regularly. Not seeing any hands. C, establish mechanisms to ensure relevant personnel coordinate their communications. No. D, specify processes for documenting engagements. And E, establish mechanisms for obtaining feedback from the SLTTGs and acting on it as appropriate. I'm not seeing any. Oh, Alex, thank you.
Yeah, so maybe this is implied in the references to communication this recommendation, but the report mentioned several times, I think, that information sharing with SLTTGs was a challenge. Is that something that we should add here for consideration about how agencies can share information with SLTTGs, or is that something that can be dealt with elsewhere?
A good point. Pulling up all the. It is in 12. And it's the training on that, so we can mirror that language is a good idea.
Sure, I think that would work for me.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other? Oh, Steph?
I think that's a great suggestion. We can't train them on the guidelines unless they're in the guidelines, but should this be sharing or receiving? Like, is it a two-way exchange?
Good point.
And I guess the same would apply below.
Good point. It's not just one direction. Thank you. Great. Any other thoughts or comments on recommendation 11? If not, we can go to number 12. Federal agencies should ensure that personnel involved in a collaboration with an SLTTG receive periodic training on topics, including the laws and policies governing the actions of the SLTTG, B, best practices for engaging with the SLTTG, C, guidelines for sharing information or receiving information with or receiving information from the SLTTG, including information that may be sensitive or protected by law, and D, procedures for managing the collaboration and communicating with the SLTTG. Give everyone a minute to look at it. And if you have any comments, questions, or edits. Caroline.
I don't know. Once the guidelines are in place for this, is it really necessary to have periodic training? This seems like adding another thing. I could see it triggered if there's that change in transitions or new relationships, making sure folks have some information, and all this seems useful. But I just, the word periodic suggested this would be like, I mean, I have periodic training that I need to do every year on certain things, and I don't know if this is the type of thing that requires that.
Thank you for the comment. Looking to our contractors or to the Kaja. What were your thoughts on this?
So one thing that came up quite a lot on both the agency side and on the SLTTG side is that it is often the case that even amongst administrators in federal agencies who have been in the agency for quite a while are not familiar with in particular, the laws and policies that govern their interactions. And in particular, sensitivities to different cultural resources and things of that nature. And so I think the spirit behind this was to ensure that administrators not only there's some sort of reinforcement mechanism to ensure that those who are working with SLTTGs understand the importance of their role, as well as the laws and policies that govern that. And those obviously can change over time with both changes in agency policy as well as changes in statutory language. So that's sort of what we were trying to get at. But if that's not clear in the language, then we should change the language.
I agree with Jen. And also the other thing that can change are changes at the subnational level too, in terms of if states pass new laws, et cetera, that might have an impact.
Thank you, Pam. Caroline, with that information, yep, I thought you might have your hand.
Is there a way to think about if we can include some kind of triggering language that's not the word periodic, that suggests, consistent over time, that's more focused on if changes occur, that folks then have to engage in some kind of knowledge. So if a new, law is passed, obviously, or if it's a new collaboration altogether, or a new person engaging in the collaboration on either side, these are all different, so it'd be nice if there was a general way to trigger this without the word periodic.
Thank you. All right, thoughts from the team?
I mean, so I'm happy to, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Vakaja.
I would say happy to take this back as more of a committee on style thing to capture that. I will note we use up to date later on to refer to like agencies updating their web pages, but I don't know that that fully gets at what you're talking about. So I think we can just take it back and sort of sit with it.
It's a good idea. My comment was going to be we went with periodic because it was more general. It wasn't like regular, annual, but your point is taken.
All right, thanks, Vakaja. We'll take it back and see what language you come up with. On the topics listed in A, B, C, D, any edits, changes, or other additions, people? I'm not seeing any hands, so we can go to 13. Federal agencies should involve personnel in their regional and local offices in collaboration with SLTTGs as applicable. I'm not seeing any hands on that one. Oh, Steph.
This is maybe just a minor point. 13, 14, 15 all seem very closely related to me and of the same vein. So I wonder if we should just make them one recommendation with 3 subparts, because they're really talking about, you know, having that sort of interaction and contact in the place where the SLTTGs are or will be. And so I think I'm not sure exactly how to structure it, but it would just be like federal agencies should, and then A would be involved personnel in their regional and local offices, and then B, visit the states. So maybe it's not federal agencies, but it's federal officials involved in collaborations with SLTTGs should. Yeah, and then involve personnel, visit the states, and attend conferences and meetings. Perfect. Yeah.
Alice? Oh, you're on mute, Alice. I cannot hear Alice. Can anyone else? We can't hear you, Alice. Maybe put in the chat since we cannot hear. Oh, your microphone isn't working. I see. If you want to put in your chat your comment since your microphone isn't working. She's asking, does as applicable make sense? She's not sure what it means.
I think this was to get to the fact that not all agencies might have regional or local offices. So it was just to involve those people as it applies to their agency.
Thank you, Bakaja. Asking maybe say as appropriate versus as applicable. That is a fine fix. Thank you, Alice. Thank you. All right, with our rewrite now, so 13 is now 13, 14, and 15 are now 13. So involve federal officials involved in collaboration with SLTTG should A now involve personnel in their regional and local offices in collaboration with SLTTGs as appropriate. B, visit the states, localities, tribal nations, and territories with which they collaborate to understand on-the-ground conditions and available resources and to foster stronger working relationships. And C, attend conferences and meetings in which SLTTGs participate and otherwise take advantage of opportunities to interact with SLTTGs in person. Any other? Okay, we have A, and on B, any edits or comments or concerns? I don't see any. So then for C, Jeremy?
Steph, I like what you did here in reorganizing this. I just wanted to confirm, would it be a friendly amendment to sort of pull out to understand on the ground conditions and available resources and to foster stronger working relationships and put that in the prefatory language to what's now 13? Because I take it that now applies to all three of these. Otherwise, we sort of explain ourselves on B, but not A and C.
That's a good point, Jeremy. Steph, no objection to that? Thank you. Any other suggested edits? And then on C, a 10. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I guess we can go down to what's the new 14. Next part's evaluating collaborations. So the new 14, federal agencies should provide opportunities on an ongoing or periodic basis for the following persons and entities to provide feedback on their collaborations with SLTTGs. A, agency personnel involved in collaborations with SLTTGs. B, SLTTGs. And C, members of the public. Any edits, comments, questions? Give everyone a minute. Not seeing anything. I guess we can move to 15. Federal agencies should collect information about all collaborations with SLTTGs, including A, any written agreements related to collaborations, B, when, how, and with whom federal agency officials communicate as part of collaborations, C, how collaborations develop over time, and D, performance in achieving objectives for collaborations. Give everyone a minute to look at it. Any suggested edits or questions or comments? Steph.
Again, I think this is a great idea, but it doesn't give much clue as to what they should do with it and what the purpose of the collection is. So I would assume, to an earlier point made by Professor Shapiro, that it's to help ensure continuity and operations, and that there's a centralized location that's accessible to personnel working with SLTTGs. And that's a long-winded way of saying that it's not just that they're collecting it, it's that they're retaining it in a central repository or making it accessible to the individuals who work on these issues. I'm trying to think of a more concise way to say that. Maybe we could commit that to
the committee on style. Yeah, no, it's a good point. As we all sit here trying to figure out the language on the spot, I think you're right, sending it to the committee on style to capture it. Sid?
We could say federal agencies collect information relevant to evaluation of collaboration or something like that. Is that what we mean? Or is that what the drafters meant?
So I will say 16 does essentially reference 15 and the fact that you are collecting information to evaluate performance, implement improvements, and engage in strategic planning. But obviously, staff also added some really good points as well. So you're collecting the information for a number of different reasons, including what's captured in 16.
Well, 17 then is pretty broad, given the variety of literally hundreds of these relationships, which hopefully lead to collaboration. And I'm not quite sure how an agency, especially if it has a lot of these, meets the objectives of 17.
Okay.
For example, when and how federal agency officials communicate as part of collaborations. I mean, does that mean they call their counterpart in the collaboration by email? I'm not. I mean, I think the objective of this is appropriate. I'm just not sure what information we're collecting for what purpose.
So, Jeremy, sorry, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, as drafted, this really was for purposes of evaluation. I think, Steph, you make a good point. That might be useful in the preceding section, just to say, like, as part of strengthening relationships, make sure agreements are available in the same way that, say, SOPs are available. As to the specific data that agencies are collecting, I know maybe I could turn to Pam and Jen. I know you obviously have given a lot of thought to how agencies can most effectively evaluate their collaborations. I mean, do you have a sense of to what extent agencies are collecting data, what kinds of data, and maybe what kinds of data they're not collecting? That would be really useful.
I think it's a general sense, and it's actually come up a little bit in the committee discussion today, and is that there are so many of these things going on that it is often the case that the people within an agency who are working with a specific SLTTG or in a specific program may have an idea of what that relationship looks like, but across all of these different partnerships, a lot of times the management at the top doesn't have a good feel for how often that these things are occurring, who's in charge of what sorts of things, and ultimately what that leads to are problems in terms of resource management, as well as things like not 100% understanding when someone with decisional authority needs to be in the room. Like it's all sort of both evaluation and planning at the top. A lot of times those at the top don't have the information that they need in order to make informed leadership decisions. So from my perspective, that was something we really wanted to capture. And I'd like Pam to talk about this because we think in different ways when it comes to this. And I think from my recollection, as we were working with ACUS to draft these recommendations, this was something that we really struggled with how to communicate that properly. Pam.
Yeah, so this is it's definitely about smoothing out that planning within the agency, because there does seem to be sort of this, because it's so varied across lots of different agencies. And in addition to that, sometimes when there's these multiple federal agencies working with this, like within a program, sometimes that happens too. And so figuring out the best way to say that this information is important to maybe communicate up and down the chain of folks within the federal government. But I can see your point, like it's like it could be really overwhelming to have this all just like yeah, you don't want them to do checklists of things, but at the same time, you want the information to be available so that you understand, are we actually doing the things we set out to achieve in these? So evaluation, as well as making sure that coordination and communication is effective. So that's my additional points.
Thank you, Jen and Pam. Sid, I saw your hand come back up.
Yeah, so a couple of suggestions. Instead of to speak to this, I hope, instead of collect, what if we use the word memorialize? And instead of including, which is very prescriptive, we say such as, which may put a little more flexibility into this and say, collect the information you need so somebody else can understand what's going on.
And with respect to B, perhaps it is better to say something like communication, like instead of doing when, how, and with whom, do something like such as federal agency officials apostrophe communication as with SLTG, or I don't know, but something like that. So it's a little, it's like broader and not, I don't know, that, yeah. Wordsmithing is not my forte.
Thank you. So we have the committee on style. Steph?
Yeah, I really think we should combine 15 and 16, because one of the purposes is for evaluation, communicating up and down. I think just given all the transition in the government recently, we should consider a second purpose, which is like allowing for changes in personnel to not be so disruptive to these relationships and ensure continuity and collaboration. And, that could go in the preamble if it were more appropriate, but I think just sort of combining it and then making clear somewhere that it's not each individual communication necessarily, but more about the channels or modes of communication, if that's appropriate. Maybe you need a little more to evaluate, but probably a summary as opposed to the individual communications.
That's helpful. Thank you, Steph. Peter?
You're on mute.
We'll give Peter a second to unmute. All right. While Peter's unmuting, anyone else have any other thoughts on the now combined 15, 16 that the community style is going to play with a little bit?
Okay,
Peter, there we
sorry.
go. There we go.
Federal agencies should memorialize information about all its collaborations rather than all collaborations. And I'm unsure whether B ought to be addressed to telephonic communication. And so I would insert the word written before communications.
What was your change in the first line, line 142? You said remove all.
Replace it with its.
Thank you, Peter. Pam, I saw your hand go up.
Sure. So I'm not quite sure if we really want to put written right there, just because many of the federal agency folks that we talked with, the communications were through non-written formats such as Zoom calls or listening sessions, etc.
Well, then collecting the information, memorializing the information is kind of hard. I mean, yes, the Zoom calls can be recorded, but then memorializing is a separate step from recording the Zoom call. This is, let's put it this way, as applied to every communication that occurs, this is going to appear quite burdensome. If what you're saying is keep appropriate records of important communications, okay, that's a different matter.
I think the general sense here is absolutely that, like, yeah, like if I send a text message to my partner because we're like on the same meeting, like that's a different sort of thing. So there is something to be said about substantive communications, but it is, I think both Pam and I feel pretty strongly that one of the problems is that, again, if agency leadership or who are managing these programs or the agency itself don't have a full idea of the extent to which administrators are spending their time engaging with state, local, tribal, and territorial partners, whether it is through face-to-face meetings, through Zoom calls, et cetera, like those are, it's important that the agency understands that so that they can plan accordingly and assess, okay, well, you know what, we have this really important partnership, but we've had no communication with them aside from like a random email over the past year, and that is a problem. One thing that we also noted was that several agencies would assume that if we don't hear from you, there is no, like, everything's fine, but there are problems with operating in that way.
So then memorialize or record, perhaps, and instead of written, how about substantive?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jen. Any other suggested edits or changes to this, especially giving food for thought for Bakaja as it goes back to the Committee on Style? If not, we can go down to what's going to be the new, well, 17, but might be the new 15, 16, or however the numbers are going to go. Federal agencies should share information with each other about their experiences with and practices for improving collaboration with SLTTGs, and the Executive Office of the President and other coordinating entities should take appropriate action to facilitate the interchange of such information and provide guidance on such collaboration. Alex.
Okay, I think I'm off mute. So my comment is related to the second part of this regarding the Executive Office of the President assisting with coordination. So this project I see as really related to agency post-promulgation administration and potentially enforcement actions related to regulatory regimes, as opposed to the promulgation of those regulatory regimes, which I think was the focus of the other recent ACUS project that we all discussed and was adopted at the last plenary. So again, this is focused on sort of post-promulgation, and for more context, everyone here is probably aware that OMB plays an important role in coordination of agencies' promulgation of regulatory actions under 12866. So there's definitely a role for OMB, and as a part of that process, we would coordinate with our colleagues across the Executive Office of the President. But again, the focus here is really the process, the administrative or other processes related to pre-existing regulatory regime as opposed to the adoption of regulatory regime. And I don't believe that the Executive Office of the President, other components or OMB regularly are involved broadly in agencies' administration of regulatory regimes in the way that maybe would make them well placed to coordinate in this way as suggested here. For instance, I think that for OMB, I'm not sure what legal authorities would have in this area. I'm sure some regulatory regimes clearly would implicate the B of OMB. You know, clearly some regulatory regimes will involve budgetary considerations, and my colleagues on the budget side of OMB might be involved. But again, that wouldn't be sort of broad-based across all regulatory regimes. Similarly, things related to grants may implicate OMB's role with respect to federal grant-making policy. So I don't know that the EOP would be well placed to coordinate in this context in the way that would be in the promulgation of regulation. I do note, however, that of course we were all today participating under the auspices of ACUS in this excellent conversation on this subject. So I would suggest that ACUS is well placed to coordinate on a continuing basis. That said, I don't know that ACUS is going to direct a recommendation to itself, which would seem slightly odd. But I certainly would say that ACUS is well placed to coordinate, you know, gather information, help share information. It may be in reports, it may be, I know ACUS takes other, I guess, slightly less formal mechanisms such as roundtables, et cetera, to sort of share information across agencies. I don't think that the Executive Office of the President would be well placed to do that. And my final closing thought would be, it's been noticed in other contexts that maybe ACUS could use assistance as far as agencies' adoption of its recommendations. And without getting into that too deeply, I'll just note that there would be a diversity of views, I think, with any suggestion that EOP and OMB should be more closely involved in agency administration and enforcement actions under regulatory regime. So again, I think having EOP here is not the best thing, and I'd just suggest striking the second part of this, but definitely would encourage ACUS to consider continuing coordination and information sharing on this subject. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Peter, I saw your hand go up. Is it on the same topic or?
Yeah, absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely is. The first half of the recommendation suggests that we're going to share it with everyone. How are we going to share it? ACUS maybe would be a possibility, but I was going to say agencies should make public information about their experiences, which then opens the possibility for monitoring by ACUS if ACUS has the resources to do that, or by academics who might wish to make the kind of really embracive studies that this report reflects. So federal agencies should make public information about their experiences with, and then whether or not the second half of the sentence belongs, and I think Alex makes a reasonable point, if it does belong, it belongs as a separate numbered recommendation. That is, we're also recommending to the Executive Office of the President and other coordinating entities that they take appropriate action in this matter, because they're not otherwise addressed. And it ought to be clear that they're being addressed.
All right. Thank
But
you.
you have not made the change I'm suggesting. Oh, no, I'm sorry, you have. I see it. No,
Yeah.
you haven't
Well,
changed. I'm suggesting in the first line of 17. Agencies should make public information about their experiences.
So Bakaja caught that on 19, Peter, we
Yeah.
talk about putting it on our website information, so that including in A, the experiences with and how they collaborate with SLTTGs. So I think your first point is captured in the edits on 19A.
Then let's get rid of 17 and not have duplication, because agencies should share information with each other. That's everybody. I mean, it's really not a helpful recommendation. In a way, people will look at it and their eyes will roll. I absolutely agree that agencies should provide up-to-date information on their websites or otherwise. And that's terrific. But with each other is the phrasing that I'm finding difficult.
Okay, thanks. Well, I saw a whole bunch of hands go up when you were talking, so let's see. I think it was Alex was first, and then
Mine was residual hand. Sorry.
oh, yours a residual. Okay, Steph.
I think these are all great points, and what we're struggling with is really, sort of an existential question of how to fill the gap of the Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, which was terminated and would have performed these functions, but isn't performing them anymore. And Congress hasn't given anyone the authority to do that, and they may not want anyone to be doing that, but at the same time, agencies can benefit from exchanging information and receiving guidance. And I do think that ACUS, in terms of its implementation responsibilities, once we have a recommendation, could perform some of these functions and really offer some of that guidance through the office of the chair or their acting chair is willing. So, that might be a question for the council at some point. But what we've used in other similar recommendations is the concept of establishing a community of practice. And if what we really think is that agencies should have a community of practice to exchange information about experiences and best practices, maybe we could say something like that, and people will roll their eyes less than saying with each other, because it sounds more formalized and important.
That's better. And if we ever make recommendations to Congress, I would be fine with recommending to Congress or to the executive that drafts legislation that the ACIR be reestablished. That makes a lot of sense. And then you would have the body with which the information would be shared.
Good suggestions, Steph. Thank you, Peter. Jen?
I would say that Steph's revisions capture the spirit of what we were going for.
Great, thank you. So our new 17 federal agencies have a community of practice to share information about their experiences with and practices for improving collaboration with SLTTGs. Thank you, Steph, for the elegant solution. Anyone else have any other thoughts or comments on it? Alex?
So just confirming that the square brackets, are we adopting my suggestion to strike what is now 18, or are we about to get there?
I think we're about to get there. I think it was on the table to strike it, unless anyone feels really strongly about keeping in the executive office of the president. But I think Steph's solution solved that, so we don't need it in there unless anyone disagrees with me.
I would agree with that. I think Steph made a great suggestion.
Thank you. Great, then we can go down to public availability of information on collaborations, the new 18. Federal agencies should provide up-to-date information on their websites describing A, their experience with and how they collaborate with SLTTGs. B, the federal agency officials with primary responsibility for specific collaborations and relevant points of contacts. Paragraph 10D. C, the federal agency official with primary responsibility for coordinating and evaluating collaborations. That might need to get changed a little bit by paragraph 4. D, written agreements regarding collaborations as appropriate. See paragraph 10. And E, information about opportunities provide feedback on collaborations. And we'll see if folks have any comments, questions, or edits. Yeah.
I just don't know if I've seen us do this parenthetical reference within a recommendation to another recommendation before. And so I think it's helpful in this context, but I wonder if that's something we're going to maintain, or if there's a different way to do that that's more conventional. I don't have strong feelings, and the ACUS staff should probably make the call.
It's a good catch, and we'll leave that noted for ACUS to go back to on style.
It's definitely been used in several recent recommendations, probably most often adjudication committee recommendations. So it would be consistent with recommendations adopted by the conference, but maybe not ones originating from this committee.
Fair enough. Okay, well, no concerns if it's something that we regularly do.
Thank you, Jeremy. All right, any other comments, edits, questions? 18A on B, C, D, or E. Oh, Steph, is that a legacy hand? Or
Yeah, well, no, it's a hands-on, I guess, B and C.
Okay.
So here we're specifying the official or individuals with primary responsibility, but folks' responsibilities are shifting as agencies are being reorganized and the ground is sort of moving underneath them. So I wonder if there's an opportunity to establish like a general point of contact or some sort of communication mechanism that doesn't depend on the individual person. Like a specific inbox that is part of the suite of collaboration materials, or, like a general point of contact for collaboration concerns, in addition to specific individuals who are identified. I know at OMB they set up inboxes all the time on a topic that are accessible by multiple individuals within the organization. And so just something like that doesn't depend on specific folks.
Very good point. Caroline?
Just for clarity, is that recommendation in lieu of having the contact information for those two specific officials?
I think you'd want to keep the officials and keep them up to date. Like that would definitely be the best practice. It just, things are happening so quickly right now that if folks did this, it might be lower on their priority list in terms of what's happening in their agencies.
Thank you. Peter?
Well, this goes back to the previous problems I had about paragraph 4. B, the officials with primary responsibility for specific collaborations and relevant points of contact, yes. But saying that in addition, there needs to be a particular official who coordinates and evaluates collaborations all across the agency. Again, I'm thinking back to the regulation of state uses of medical regulation of medical radioactive materials, and having somebody at the NRC who would be responsible for coordinating not only that, but the way in which licensing officials dealt with plans for nuclear power plants. It's
Thanks, Steph.
not sensible from my perspective.
Yeah, and I know we were fixing that language above. So, Peter, for the agencies that do have it, though, like so, it really is as appropriate. So, some agencies do have primary, like one person that they say is like primary for that. So, if we fix the language so it's as for the ones that do, they can capture it, but for the ones that don't, we're not creating a requirement that doesn't make sense for them. Yep.
Fine.
Yep. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for raising it again. And I know Bikaja will massage that to marry the language so it reflects what we did above. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Anyone else have any feedback or edits for this section? If not, I think that's the last one of our recommendations. Congratulations getting through our first draft of the recommendations. We've got about 19 minutes left. Do we want to hit the start the preamble? Or do we think there's going to be a lot of changes we're going to be adding before we want to do our first crack at the preamble?
Let's wait.
Got Peter's vote for waiting. How's everyone else feel? I know we have a lot of placeholders for like new language we wanted to put in there. I'm kind of looking. Do we want to wait and see what the new language looks like? Yeah, it looks like I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding to wait. All right, yes, I see fingers up too. I guess I could just take a vote, but that would be too easy. It looks like the consensus is we should wait to start hitting this until our next meeting so we can see what the new language changes would be with the additions that we're looking for. So with that, I want to thank you all for sticking through getting all the recommendations. I am impressed. I didn't think we'd make them all to sit through it today. So thank you everybody for your excellent feedback and suggestions on that. And thank you for the wonderful thought to go back on some of the stuff with the committee from the committee to go back to for the committee on style. I'm looking forward to see what our new edits look like. And what we will meet next on Thursday, October 2nd at 9:30 a.m. Is there anything else, Bikaja, that before I hand it back over to you?
Nope, we're all good to go. Thank you so much, Helen, Jen, and Pam. Really appreciate it, and everyone on the committee for your thoughts.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.